let's get started. So, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, sir.
So, my name is Debayan Gupta, and I am a very bad scientist because scientists are supposed to be usually, whenever we do our PhDs or upper degrees, we're told get narrow, focus on a smaller and smaller sub area until you know everything about nothing. That's our target. But I think as a human being, I'm a very curious sort of person. I am not a I'm not a person that's interested in one single area. So today I will suddenly decide I want to study biology, which is something I tried to do for the last 3 years. Similarly, some years back I decided to study robotics. And then I said, chalo robotics pad lete hain. And I focused on that only for a few years. Did a bunch of stuff and then switched. I still do some amount of robotics. But in my study of all of these different topics, one of the things that I really learned to enjoy was this learning process itself. Because I think especially during school, I hated it. So I had wonderful teachers, I hated it. So they kya padha raha hai bhai? Somehow get the marks, ghar jao. Football player, right? I was not a cricket fan, pure football person. But I got very, very lucky. Somehow, when I was studying a couple of these topics, I think because I was studying stuff outside of school, if it was in syllabus, I would not have liked it. Because it was out of syllabus, I started studying some stuff. And I want to introduce you to one of the most interesting topics that I have encountered, which is something called privacy preserving computation. So, I think most of you have a basic concept of security. You don't need to have a computer science degree to think about this. हम जब छोटे होते हैं, we play hide and seek, right? It's a very natural game. If you want to keep something safe in a bank, what do? Locker रहता है. You go lock it inside the safe. There's a very natural set of ideas around security and safety that we have. I want to first go through some of these ideas before I introduce the more advanced topics. I'm going to take 10 or 15 minutes to go through these ideas and articulate them. I think it's very important. One of the mistakes we make as human beings is that we think of things but we don't write them down. And it is this act of crystallizing thought into writing, that action forces you to become precise. And that precision is really, really important. So we're going to explore that a little bit. So when you have sorry, let me just click this instead. When you look at security systems, we have an initial idea, which is there's a lot of data. There are very large amounts of data. And in a lot of cases, it's not a question of security. It is a question of law. You're not allowed to share. So you can't say that, I went and I got my MRI done at the hospital, and the hospital in a very secure fashion published that information on the internet. Hospital cannot say that, no, when we publish, we use HTTPS. That is ridiculous, right? So it's not just a question of security, it's a question of policy, what you're supposed to allow and what you're not supposed to allow. However, while doing this, we use some of these intuitions that we discussed before, which is what? That when you keep something safe, it needs to be locked away. You can't use the thing that you kept safe. Let's say, I'm saying something very simple. I want to take 2 minutes to make sure we're on the same page on this. Suppose I have a piece of paper and I write something down. Okay, who is going to win the F1 race next week? I write it down. If I put it inside a box and I lock the box, well, by definition it is now safe. But I can't use that information. If I want to use it, if I give you the box, if you want to use the information, what do you need to do? You need to open the box and then take it out. Everyone agrees? So we have this gut feeling intuition that in order to use something, you have to open the box. When the box is closed and locked, you can't use it. It is safe, it is secure, but it's not usable. In order to use it, I need to open the box. But the moment you open the box, your security is gone, right? At the time when you open the box, if someone is looking, you don't have security, right? Now, this intuition has been around for a very long time. It turns out that this intuition is wrong. Mathematics, it turns out, in surprisingly simple ways, allows us to compute functions without looking at the underlying value. Right? This is very, very strange. Because you'll say, if I don't know what the numbers are, how will I compute on top? Right? It seems very strange. I'll give you a toy example that even a primary school student can understand. Suppose we want to figure out our average, let's say, amount of money we have. If this was an MBA school, I would say salary. Right? So let's say we want to calculate our average salary. Now everyone's salary is secret information. Nobody wants to give out their salary. Agreed? But we want some average value for our own purposes. Everyone agrees that they want to learn what the average is. Because if I know I'm below average, I'll go shout at my boss, give me more money. Everyone wants to know the average. Nobody wants to give their own value. It's a very common situation. We'll go through some real world examples of where this is being used a little bit later. So let me just give you that kindergarten type example. I take a calculator, I add my salary to it, I add some random number. Could be. Whatever, negative, positive, whatever number I add. I give it to him, he adds his salary, he adds a random number. Gives it to the next person. Each of you, you add your salary, you add a random number. After it goes around the room, it comes back to me. I just subtract the random number that I added. I give it to him. Whatever random number he added, he also removes. So all of us added some random numbers, we just remove those random numbers. So what is left? Just the sum of everyone's salary. You divide, you get the average. Right? This is very obviously a fairly secure process. Right? Because if I take my salary and I add a random number to it, that's it. That number, that summation is effectively random. You can't tell anything about my salary from that. So we just calculated the average, but everyone's individual secret is still secret. What is interesting is that it turns out if you can do addition, which we just did, and if you can do multiplication, for which there is a more complicated process, you can build what we in computer science would call a NAND gate, which is a universal gate. Which means that once you can do addition and multiplication, you can actually do anything, any function, any computable function you can build out of this. Which means this is a very, very strange claim that I am making, that we can compute arbitrary functions on secret data. Now when I say this, it sounds like I'm using some tough English, arbitrary functions on secret data. But let's think about what we mean. Let's take, this is an app that I'll show you a little bit later. Let's take something like Google Maps. Imagine you're saying that you want to go from point A to point B. Okay. Let's say you say that no, point A and point B are my secret. मैं किसी को नहीं बोलूँ. A and B, I want to go from here to there. I will not tell Google where I want to go. But Google has the mapping data. You don't have traffic and mapping data. That is Google's secret. I am claiming what we just agreed to is that you can somehow learn using Google's mapping data the shortest traffic path of getting from A to B without revealing to Google what A and B are. अब ये कैसे हो सकता? How will Google tell me how to go from A to B if A and B I say I am not going to tell anyone, it's my private secret? Do you see how counterintuitive and weird it is? How will Google say A to B कैसे जाओगे without knowing what A and B are? ये वो कैसे सकता? But we just talked about some mathematics and there's a bunch more mathematics in there which allows exactly this counterintuitive thing. right? People like to joke that this is like quantum mechanics in mathematics. You can figure out the math, but somehow the logic of it is very hard to get in your head, right? So there are a bunch of different approaches to doing this, but all of them, it ranges from techniques like Shami's secret sharing, which we'll see, all the way to homomorphic encryption, which we won't see. There are techniques like goblet circuits, which we'll briefly mention, but all of them enable this exciting new ability that you are able to compute and reach conclusions without ever seeing the raw data. This is a very strange phenomenon, and it is being used right now by various governments and armed forces across the world. I've worked with a few of them. I'll show you some examples. Probably the entity that is using this the most is the government of Estonia, mainly because they keep getting attacked by various countries, so they have very high quality IT. But the Indian government also uses it. Anyone's used GEM? Anyone know what GEM is? Government e-marketplace, right? So GEM tendering process is done via Shami secret sharing. So I'll talk through exactly how that process works. What is protected, what is not protected. I will assume at least class 6 level mathematical background. I'm assuming all of you have much higher mathematical background than that. But I'm only going to use addition, multiplication, and a little bit of algebra. I'm not going to use anything more complicated. Mainly because you don't need anything. That is the surprising part about these techniques. Because a lot of modern techniques, the feeling is बहुत complicated, बहुत कुछ सीखना पड़ेगा. What is amazing about some of these newer techniques that we're using is that it turns out that the mathematics required is surprisingly simple. It requires maybe 1 or 2 semesters worth of classes to completely know everything. And a lot of the new tech that we're building, so for example, a lot of my research is sponsored by WhatsApp. So I direct some of the crypto labs in India. So when you're using WhatsApp, the underlying technology you're using is based on some of this stuff, right? And we don't use integer-based systems, these are all elliptic curve-based, but it's the same sort of idea. And if we have time at the end, I'll also discuss some elliptic curve stuff, and we'll see how that goes. Okay. I'll be through this story. There is one term that I didn't introduce. This is a trusted third party. So whenever we build a protocol, here's how we say if our system is good enough, right? We don't, in order to say if something is good, you need a measurement, right? You need something to compare it to. So whenever we build any system, we always say let's first build an ideal functionality and compare it to that. Otherwise, how do we know what we built is good or bad? So usually the way to compare it is pretend that God walks into the room, right? So we are calculating our average salary, God turns up, Bhagwan aake. Bhagwan aake, everyone gives your data to Bhagwan, God calculates the average and gives it back to you, right? We want our system to be as secure as that. Now think about it. In a room with 2 people, even if God comes in and you give your average salary, you give your salary to God and God gives you the answer, you can calculate the other person's salary, right? In a room with 100 people, if 99 of you make your salary public, the 100% salary becomes solvable, even if God comes into the room. So it's not that you have perfect security. You have security equivalent to God walking into the room. Now, unfortunately, maybe some of you are more bhakt than I am. My calculations are not so important that God turns up, right? So I have to use mathematics instead, which is its own form of divinity according to certain people. But it turns out that maths can achieve some very interesting outcomes in this situation. And I'll show you some real world examples of how we do this. Before we do that, I'll give you some motivation. Usually teachers my teachers always told me that whenever you teach something, you should first give a motivation. Why are we doing this? So I'll give you some reasoning why we want to do this also. So I talked about this multi-party computation, homomorphic encryption. These are all complicated names. They're all talking about this different tools to solve this problem. That I have information that I am not allowed to share. If I'm a hospital, or I'm a military, or I'm someone else, I'm not allowed to share information. And usually what happens in civilian life especially is that you are protected by retributive processes. Let's think about what that means. A law against murder does not mean murder cannot happen. It means after murder occurs, the law will come after you. Agreed? It is a retributive process. It is not preventative. And we've all learned that prevention is better than cure. Now, if you are a military and someone hacks into your system, some other military force hacks into your system, you can't say, "Main case kar dunga." People will laugh at you. You can't afford to have retributive processes because your retribution is war, and you don't want that. So you need preventative processes, right? And what that means is you never ever want your data to get out. So a lot of militaries are interested in these technologies. In fact, one of our deployments was with US and British Army helmet systems, so that they could coordinate without sharing their exact locations. So we'll talk through some of those details in a moment. But even in civilian life, this is sometimes important. What you're seeing right now is a project that we're doing currently with something called NACO. This is the National AIDS Control Organization. So the government of India, what it does is that in order to prevent the spread of HIV/AIDS, it provides free medication daily to about 2 crore people, right? Sorry, not 2 crore people, to 20 lakh people. I missed a zero there. To roughly 17 to 20 lakh people every single day. So it provides free medication. Now the problem is that across India there are these 700 ART centers, antiretroviral therapy centers, and they need to give out medication. But the problem is HIV/AIDS is a very stigmatized disease. If you have a list of AIDS patients, you cannot send it out anywhere. Right? It cannot get leaked because these people will get into huge trouble if that happens. It is an individual's decision whether they tell their family and friends that they are suffering from this disease. You as a doctor, if you leak this information, you are in terrible trouble. Right? But on the other hand, this medication is extremely expensive. So how do you keep track of your inventory? Ki kal, how many doses will I carry? Right? And it's not the same as yesterday because people migrate. Right? So you have to decide a public, and this is so expensive that this is an actual line item on the national budget of India. Right? This needs to go all the way up to the finance minister. This is such a big amount. So this is a public amount, but it needs to be decided on the basis of data that is completely private. It cannot be leaked. So this is stuff that we're working on right now in collaboration with NACO. So what we've done is we've built various machine learning processes. You'll see that there's something called Times FM in there. Times FM is, you've all heard of ChatGPT and large language models like that. These are based on a transformer architecture. And Times FM is Google's latest foundation model, transformer-based foundation model for time series modeling. What that means is you've done ChatGPT gives you text, right? But as we all know, the world doesn't run on text, it runs on Excel files. All decisions are made, someone is looking at an Excel file and making a decision, right? So, if you're modeling time series, that this is the temperature today, this is the temperature tomorrow, this is the temperature on this date, what is the temperature going to be on that date? If you're predicting time series, so this is the latest transformer architecture based on that. And what we did is we built a completely secure version of that process flow. So it takes their data, just like our salaries remain secret, all of the AIDS patients' data remains secret. It never leaves, right? So each individual patient is completely certain that my information is secret, it cannot get leaked, because I'm not giving the password to anyone else. Remember, you were only adding and you were only subtracting. You were never giving your secret random number to anybody else, right? So it's somewhat like that. It's a bit more complicated, but we are running complete machine learning models doing what is known as secure inference on top of that entire system. And there's a lot of machine learning experts across the world who are getting into this because all of these big models, they've eaten up all the public data. That is done. Now the problem is they want to work on private data, but obviously private data no one wants to give. And this is the technique that we are coming to where we are saying we can give you the best results based on your private data while guaranteeing that your private data remains private. Right? And there's a lot of work happening all over the world on this. So this is in collaboration with a US university. It's called Johns Hopkins. They have a very good medical school, one of the best medical universities in the world. So we're working together with them and the good doctors at the National AIDS Control Organization, and this is currently being integrated into their systems. They have a database system called Soch into which they're integrating a lot of this stuff. And these have their own sort of problems, as I mentioned. I mentioned migration, but there's a lot of this, people become allergic, they switch to different drugs, so it's a fairly complicated system to model. What is amazing is this. We talked about addition and averaging. Addition averaging is a fairly simple thing, right? Look at how many different things we're talking about. You have mixes of drugs. It's not you're giving one drug, it's a combination. One person has one dosage, another person has another dosage. Right? You have this entire population of children with HIV/AIDS because they were born, their mother had HIV/AIDS. So from birth only they have HIV, they don't have a choice. And pediatrics, they have completely different dosages. Right? Some people are allergic to one drug but not to another. All of this, just like we modeled this simple averaging process, we're able to do all of it. Every single thing. Right? While guaranteeing that just like your salary remains secure, that everything in the system remains completely secure. Right? I'm not going to go too much into the history of it. You probably, people have seen movies like The Imitation Game or whatever, World War II, cryptography, this, that. Everyone knows this background. Sometimes when if people are interested, I can talk more about some of these machines that were used during the wars. Some people were really crazy, If you go back to ancient Greece and all, you had generals who were communicating. They would take a slave, they would shave their heads, tattoo the message on their head, wait for the hair to grow back, send that fellow to the other general, and the other general would shave the fellow's head again. Okay, so people got really complicated things going on. But World War II, I think, is when a lot of this technology really got developed. And then the next motivation for improving this requirement about privacy came because of people like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, all of these companies. So the thing is that all of these big companies, the way they make profit is because they're taking your data. The more information they have on each of you, the more profit they can make. In fact, we have minutes from the meetings where Google, now Alphabet, when they launched a browser called Google Chrome, many of you probably use that browser. Their official reason, this is the written down, they're not keeping this a secret. Their official reason for making a browser was, what if people go to websites without using google.com and then we don't know where they're going? Let us instead create the best browser in the world so that we can always track every single person. That is the stated reason for making Chrome. Right? That is how much they want your money. Your data, their money. And to make sure you understand what I'm talking about, everyone's heard of Amazon. I'm sure most of us use it. Can someone guess what Amazon was called when it was launched? Any idea? So Jeff Bezos creates this company. He starts out as a book company, right? He starts by selling books. And then you'll see on YouTube, there's lots of interviews of Jeff Bezos where people go, why are you selling books? You're not even making that much of a profit. And he says, I don't care about books. Reporters like, hang. You made a company, you're an entrepreneur, you're selling books, you don't care about books, what are you doing with your life? Why are you selling books if you don't care about books? He says, no, the only reason I'm starting with books is because I think which books you read give me a lot of information about you. Think about how much guts that takes as an entrepreneur, that I will spend 8 to 10 years selling just books, not because I want to sell books, just to gather information on people. And then I will launch properly, right? That takes a lot of patience and a lot of bravery, right? And the man is genuinely mad. I mean, it takes a certain kind of madness to be that successful. But when it was launched, he had two names in mind. One was this magic word, abracadabra kehte hain. So he wanted to call it cadabra. His PR people told him, please don't call it cadabra, that's a terrible name. It sounds like cadaver, dead body, that sort of thing. Aap cadabra mat kahiye. So he said, fine. But even today, there's another name which he keeps. So Jeff Bezos has still kept this name registered. It is Relentless. So if you type into your browser relentless.com right now, it will redirect to Amazon. He still has that name. Because that is his ethos. And it is the ethos of people like this chap as well. I didn't put the name. This is Eric Schmidt. And Eric is the person who really built Google as a company. And I want you to think about what he's written in the second paragraph. We don't need you to type at all. We know where you are, we know where you've been, we can more or less know what you're thinking. And Google does this. When you're typing, the reason Google, you'll see more than other websites, Google tends to load its answers very quickly. It's because it has already guessed what you're about to type, it has already performed the search, and it's sitting there in your browser with 5-7 different search results ready to go. आप क्या search करने वाला? मुझे सब पता है. Right? That is how well they have profiled all of us. And because of all of this profiling, privacy experts have become much more concerned. And so we are looking a lot more into this kind of privacy preserving technology. Because it's not good enough to say हम Google use नहीं करेंगे. अरे क्या use नहीं करोगे? Every day you have to use it. You don't have a choice. What will you do? You live like a hermit in the forest? नहीं कर सकते. So if you want the plus points of the technology, but you still want privacy, then you need something like the class of technologies that we're talking about. 4 of them need to be able to reconstruct it. All I'm going to do is I'm going to write any random nonsense equation with x to the power of 3. कोई भी number, 83x to the power of 3 minus 17x to the power of 2 plus 874x to the power of 1 plus last term is whatever I want my password to be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? I write this random equation, I plug in random values of x, कुछ भी, not 0, any non-zero value of x I plug in. X equals 74, x equals minus 865, x equals this, x equals that, कोई भी value of x. Right? And whatever point that is, I give out. Right? X comma y, whatever point I end up getting, I plug in a value of x, I get a y, right? So I get x comma y. I give x comma y out to all of you. And then 4 of you will need to come together. Why? Because it's an x cubed equation. And we discuss some examples of this. Around 1990, a US company, along with some others that you've heard of. So the US company was AT&T Bell Labs, and the other company was Motorola. They came up with a brilliant idea. They called it cell phones, right? At the time, it was about the size of a brick and about the weight of a brick, right? Itna bada tha. And their ads were all about stock market, Wall Street types playing golf and saying, buy this stock, buy that stock. That was their ad, right? Because the stuff was expensive. And they made these cell phones, and they had a worry. They thought that, wait, stock market mein what big people are buying is important. We want some kind of security, right? We don't want some person with a radio transceiver just listening in on this thing and then buying that same stock because they know, oh, Warren Buffett khareed raha hai, main bhi khareed lu, I will get some money out of it. So they don't want that information getting out. So AT&T put a protection on all of these cell phones. They called it A51. A51 was the protection they put. Then they started selling these phones and they started selling these phones internationally. Immediately the US government came in. US government said you can't sell. We won't allow it. Like why? Aapka kya problem hai? We are making profits, we are giving taxes. What is your problem? They said no. We have spent so much money and so much infrastructure and we have embedded so many spies into our signals intelligence. And you are now coming up with this new device which we cannot penetrate because of your protection, your encryption A51 on it. We will not allow it. But then AT&T made a very compelling argument. They said, but paisa. So US government said, I understand. Okay, let's reach a middle ground. So the middle ground they reached was the US government. They made a fake encryption, nakli. जो बाहर से दिखता है as if it is secure, but it is not secure. And because they were so creative, they called it A52. And they said AT&T को आप ये A52 encryption लो, sell this to the rest of the world. So they will think it is. So imagine you are Japan, you are UK, you are Australia, you are India. Big companies. आप Reliance की बात सोचो तब Command नाम का एक company था. These companies they are buying technology. Imagine you are buying Microsoft Word from Microsoft. You are trusting them, right? You are paying money, you are trusting them. But US government ने क्या किया है? They have secretly embedded a weakness into that software so they can get it. We are paying good money for it, but the US government has purposely embedded a weakness into the system. This is why the US government got so angry with Huawei and started banning them. Because they're like, no, we are the people allowed to do this, not you people. Only we can hack. You are not allowed. Right? Huawei bhi kar raha tha. They were doing the same badmashi. Right? So they put A52. Unfortunately, they didn't realize one problem. Most of the cell phones in the world ended up being manufactured in countries like China and India. So even the Americans were buying the same A52 wala broken stuff. So the entire world ended up using this A52. And everyone knew about it. The US government knew about it, Indian government also knew about it, everyone knew. Everyone was happy. Because Indian government was also like, yeah, we can also listen in on people's phone calls. This is great. We love it. So many years later, Apple and Samsung got together. They said, no, this is not tolerable. We will build a new technology. This was based on a Japanese encryption technique called Kasumi. And they called it A53, which they then deployed. And that's what most of your phones are using right now. But even then, right now, let's say I live in Delhi. If you drive past most of the Delhi embassies with a detector, they all have cell phone towers or what looks like cell phone towers sitting inside. And these towers, if you're driving nearby and you make a call, here's what they do. You make a call, your phone is trying to connect over the A53 system, which is secure. This tower, because if you're close by, it is the nearest tower your phone trying to save battery will connect to it. Or ye tower, what will it say? It says A53. No, I'm a very purana phone tower. Ye A53 new language mujhe nahi pata hai. Please communicate with me in the purana wala A52. I'm an old phone tower. And your phone without telling you will fall back to A52 and give you a call. So you are thinking you're talking, that embassy is listening into all your information. So either these embassies are very poor and they have very old towers sitting from 20 years ago, or they are doing something a little bit nefarious, right? And this is everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're in front of the US embassy or Swedish embassy. Sab karte hain, right? Why am I telling you this story? I am telling you this in order so that you can understand how big this game is, right? This is not some game where it's some hacker sitting in a basement trying to hack it. Think about it. Governments are manipulating not just one company but entire technologies in order to maintain their long-term power. It's not about hacking into your personal phone ka history. It's about saying, I will have every email, every message, every photo sent by every single one of you, because I know that 20, 30 years from now, one of you will be Prime Minister. One of you will be Chief Minister of a state. And I will have every message you have ever sent in your life at that point in time. That is the idea followed by the US government. That's what Edward Snowden revealed when he talked about X-Keyscore and PRISM and all of these programs. That the US government, in collaboration with the Five Eyes, as it's called, these are basically English-speaking white-skinned countries. So France, Germany are out. New Zealand is in for some reason, right? They decided to do this. And what this means is that pretty much if you buy a Cisco router, imagine US government Cisco is selling routers to Australia, and US government was embedding spine chips inside them physically. And think about it, they don't know which router is going where. They said, we know these people are going to buy, so we are going to put chips in every single router. Because I know one of them is going to turn up, right? So they're willing to spend that much money. And like I said, they're not after your internet history. They are after this long-term bulk surveillance of absolutely everybody. So that 10, 20, 30 years from now, whoever is in positions of power, they have every message, every photo, every video, everything they have ever sent. And they're spending absolutely massive amounts of money on this. Just so you can understand how much money we are talking about, can someone tell me India ka budget kya hai? Any idea? Every year there is an official budget and there is a fiscal deficit. वो कुल मिला के कितना होता है? Any idea? ये सब number you hear about 30 lakh crore का budget है. That's what India's budget is roughly around 400 billion. 420 billion US dollars. Okay. The Pentagon's budget is around 800 billion. Right? That's how much money they're willing to put into it. And remember, this budget is not balanced. Like they keep it a secret, a large portion of what they do. They themselves don't know what it is being spent on. Right? And so it's being done without oversight and very, very unethical. And believe you me, China is also doing the same thing. Yes?
Sir, first of all, I want to ask how a small company or a startup can get the data legally or illegally. Is there any way
We'll talk about it. We'll talk about how the spread of the data is. So, let me skip over this. I'll come to the ELPR storyline a little bit later. But I want to spend a few minutes talking about this class of technologies that I mentioned earlier. So, given this background, this way in which we appear to be exposed to a lot of powerful actors. Because think about it, Google wants all your data. Why? Because it makes profit. US government wants all your data. Why? Because whatever reasons it has. How are we supposed to protect ourselves? All these big entities, big companies, big countries, they want to hack. What can we do? We can turn off the computer. That's not a real solution. So we're turning to technologies more like this, where even you have a set of entities. I've just put X1 through Xn, it doesn't matter, whatever. It is just set of people. Each of them has some data, and we want to compute that entire data. We did this with averaging right now, right? So X1 was your salary, X2 was the next person's salary, X3 was the next person's salary. F in that case was just averaging, and we computed the average. This, it turns out, of course, is fairly easy to do. This is another way to think about that same process. The calculator one is very easy to verbally give. This is a slightly different way. Imagine there are three parties. Here's one way to think about it. Let's say there's three of us. What I do is I take my salary, I break it into three pieces. So the sum of the three numbers adds up to my salary. I give one number to this side, I give one number to that side. All three of us, we do the same thing, right? So you take your salary, break it into 3 pieces. Now if you do this and you share it across in this way, you'll get the same sum. Because think about it, I have 3 numbers, the sum of these 3 is my salary. I give 1 number to this side, I give 1 number to that side, I keep 1 number with myself. You all have 3 numbers that add up to your salary. You give 1 number to them, 1 number to me, 1 number to yourself. You do the same thing. You have 1 number, you break it into 3 parts, keep 1 with you, give 1 to me, 1 to this side. So I have some numbers, 1 I kept for myself, 1 I got from you all, 1 I got from this side. I add these 3 up. I publish this number. You add your 3 numbers up, publish it. You add your 3 numbers up, publish it. The sum of these 3 will be the sum of the salaries only. Right? Because we haven't done anything except addition and subtraction. Right? So there can't be anything else. It is just the sum of these 3 numbers. So it turns out that this kind of toy technique is actually fairly powerful. We do this kind of secure outsourcing all of the time. This is heavily in use in a lot of more technologically advanced countries. I mentioned Estonia, Singapore uses a lot of this stuff as well. The Indian government uses this, right? So if this is the official government documentation for the government e-marketplace system, and they use a particular kind of encryption. I'm going to try and explain exactly how that works. Okay. I have a very bad animation of it, but let me see. I'm going to fast forward through some of this. So let's talk about the problem setting that the Indian government tries to solve. It's like this. They are saying that suppose I have this building that I want to get painted, right? So what do? I put out a tender. I say I have this big building, I need someone to paint it, here's a tender, and then businesses apply for that tender. So someone says I will do it at 2 crores, someone says 5 crores, someone says 4.5 crores, it's a big building. Lots of money. So lots of people bid. Now what is the fear? The fear is that whoever is the government official, right, who is receiving the tenders, that person might take a bribe and then tell, hey, आप 1.9 का करो, आपका lowest tender आ जाएगा. That is the fear. That the government official who is getting the tenders may be corrupt. Right? So we want to come up with a system so that you need multiple government officers to open the bids. Does that make sense? So different people give the bids, and the idea is you need multiple people to open the bid somehow. Now you could do this really badly. So for example, you could say, suppose I have said secret password number 1, and we make a rule that 4 officers are needed to open the bid. So what do? Before the process occurs, you give officer number 1 the first 4 letters, you give officer number 2 ETPA, officer number 3 SSWO, officer number 4 gets RD #1. So that when the bids have all come in, all 4 officers need to come together, and then all of these numbers can be opened up. All of these boxes can be unlocked, because the key to open the boxes is the secret password number 1 password. Everyone gets this? Now, this has a very bad problem. What is the problem? The problem is that what if one officer dies? Or what if one officer forgets the password? Now you are in trouble. Any one of them they forget and it's all over. You can't do anything. Right? So you need something that is a little bit robust. What you need is something like K out of N. So you say that, look, we are going to have 15 officers. Any 4 of those 15 should be able to come together and open it. Does that make sense? So you say any 4 out of 15, or any 3 out of 7, or any K out of N should be able to open these bids. That is what the Indian government wanted to solve. Is the problem scenario very clear to everyone? Yeah? So they wanted to solve this situation, and this is the method that they used. Everyone knows straight line का equation? याद है सबको? Fantastic. So imagine you have x-axis, y-axis, and you just draw some random straight line. Okay? All I'm going to do is I'm going to y equals mx plus c. What is this c? This is the cut on the y-axis. When x is equal to 0, this is where it cuts the y-axis. Suppose everyone remembers this?
Yes, sir.
Very simple stuff. So what I'm going to do is let c be my password. Let's say my password is 1234. Suppose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 1234 wala cut on the y-axis. Y is equal to 1234, x is equal to 0. I'm going to take that point. How many lines can I draw? Infinite number of lines, right? Infinite number of lines go through a point. I will draw some random line. Aankhein band karke, starting from that point, just random line. Now I will take any point. Now lamba line hai, I'll just take arbitrary points on that line, hand it out to people. Now think about what we have. Any one person gets 1 point. I give you 1 point, I give you 1 point, I give you 1 point, I give you 1 point. Each of you has 1 point from the line. 8 point later, what will you do? Nothing. But if any two of you get together, you can redraw the line. 2 points se line ban jayega. समझ में आ गया? So any two of you can redraw the line. The moment you draw the line, you will see where it cuts the y-axis and you get the password. समझ में आ गया? And this is perfectly secure because it is infinitely secure. With 1 point, you can draw an infinite number of lines. Right? So with 1 point, you have no idea what the password is. It is 1 over infinity probability. It is impossible for you to find the password. Right? In a computer system, obviously, it's not over infinity. It is whatever the size of your number is and so on. But it is very secure in that sense. But when the moment you have 2 points, it doesn't take any computation at all. It's like very easy to immediately find where it cuts the y-axis and get that password. Everyone gets it? Now that you know this, it should be fairly easy for you to guess how we are going to do higher values. What I described to you is 2 out of n, agreed? I give it out to 50 people, 100 people, doesn't matter. Any 2 can come together and create it, agreed? Any 2 can come together, draw the line, you're done. But what if I want 3 out of n? How will I do it? Any idea? It's a simple trick, same idea, just increase the order of the equation. Instead of x plus c, just have an x squared term. You remember 3 points make a circle and all of that? So the moment you have an equation that requires 3 points to reconstruct, you have a 3 out of n scheme. If you have an x to the power of 3, you will need 4 points to reconstruct it. Whatever the power of x is, you will need 1 more than that many points to reconstruct it. Right? So it turns out that if I want, for example, 4 out of 8, so I'm going to give these points out to 8 officers. Any 4 of them need to be able to reconstruct it. All I'm going to do is I'm going to write any random nonsense equation with x to the power of 3. कोई भी number, 83x to the power of 3 minus 17x to the power of 2 plus 874x to the power of 1 plus last term is whatever I want my password to be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? I write this random equation, I plug in random values of x, कुछ भी, not 0. Any non-zero value of x I plug in. X equals 74, x equals minus 865, x equals this, x equals that. कोई भी value of x. Right? And whatever point that is, I give out. Right? X comma y, whatever point I end up getting, I plug in a value of x, I get a y, right? So you get x comma y. I give x comma y out to all of you. And then 4 of you will need to come together. Why? Because it's an x cubed equation. 4 of you will need to come together in order to recreate that polynomial and then you can retrieve the password. Does that make sense? And the logic is the same as line. You need 2 points to make a line. Right? Same sort of thing. If there's one more term, you need 3 points. If there's another term, you need 4 points, and so on and so forth. Okay. So this is actually what is used by the Indian government in the government marketplace system. So when you make a bid, your secret is actually split in this way. So when you say 2 crores, they take that number 2 crores, they pretend it is a y-axis cut, they generate a polynomial like this, they take arbitrary random points on that polynomial, give those points out to different officers. So each officer just has a point, nothing else. With that point, they don't even know what the bid is. It is only after bid has closed that 4-5 officers can come together, they can give their points, and the points combine to create the number. Right? And this has actually resulted in a massive reduction in this type of corruption. Of course, other kinds of corruption continue, but this particular kind of corruption has been, here's your word for the day, obviate, to anticipate and render something unnecessary. This has been obviated by this technology. And again, what is amazing about this is not like quantum mechanics, basically. It's class 6 mein you learn this, 6, 7, 8 mein you learn this geometry. It's not even class 12 stuff. And yet it is this surprisingly simple mathematics that is being used to enable such powerful applications. Now, you may have seen some complicated slides just before this, so there are more complex processes for doing this as well. These processes that I am describing, these are more for creating the kind of computation that I am talking about for a circuit. So if you have an arbitrary circuit that you've created, set of truth tables basically, you can encrypt and get the result in the way that I described, and that's what is used in a lot of real world scenarios. But secret sharing is incredibly easy to do. This stuff is very, very fast, and it's very commonly used. This is something that we built actually for the US government. So you remember the Google Maps application, right? So the Google Maps, what did I say? You want to go from point A to point B, but you don't want anybody in the world to know what A and B are, right? This, like we agreed, seems counterintuitive. How will somebody else tell me how to get from A and B if I don't tell them what my starting and ending A and B points are? हो कैसे सकता है? But हो सकता है. And in fact, this tool is currently in use. So various US government and some other governments, I can't name them, various high-level officials use this. So various presidents, prime minister level people, when they travel, they can't afford to let random people know what they're looking for. So a lot of the higher level communication occurs with these kinds of secret shared data, so that they can check what is the situation in this route, what is the situation in that route immediately through their applications while maintaining privacy of what they're searching for, right? This particular application is a nearness finding application. So I'll tell you where this was deployed. This was actually deployed in Afghanistan some years after this, and the idea is like this. You have a bunch of American soldiers and you have a bunch of British soldiers, right? They're all operating in the same area. Friendly fire is a very real concern. But the Americans don't trust the British, and the British definitely don't trust the Americans. So if you're a British soldier, you don't want to broadcast, here is my GPS location, here is my GPS location all the time, right? But you also want to let them know, you want to know that we are too close to each other. So you need some mechanism so that if we come within, let's say, 2 kilometers of each other, I get a warning, hey, this person is 2 kilometers away in this direction. Outside of that, however, my location must remain completely private. Does that make sense? So just like your salary was secret and we computed the average, here your secret is your GPS coordinates, and your function, just like averaging, is something like, is there someone within 2 kilometers of my current location? That is the function that we want to calculate, right? And so this was actually integrated into the helmet devices of various soldiers, so that they could get these warnings in real time and immediately be warned if there was someone that was in danger of being hit by friendly fire. So these technologies are being deployed in various, especially special forces entities across the world. A lot of civilians have also begun using this tech. I won't really talk too much about Bharat Sim, but I'll end with a simple example that a lot of this also found application during COVID. So what happened during COVID is people were giving out all sorts of private data all the time, right? Anything people want, we give out. Why? Because we want to prevent the spread of disease. In fact, the previous slides that you talked about, this is an animation of the Mumbai area, and some folks from TIFR and some groups at our institute, we were we were modeling the spread of disease so that government could spend, could regulate its spending. How much, you have a limited amount of medication, how much medication to send to this hospital versus that hospital, how much oxygen is required here versus there. And these are very difficult things to decide under pressure. So we were helping them model some of this stuff. And one of the things we realized is that you need a good way to monitor your exposure. And various countries started building this, exactly the kind of technology I talked about, because you don't want to say where you are and who are all the people you've met, right? You don't want a permanent government GPS tracker in every single phone. That's too much, right? On the other hand, you do want to know, have I been exposed or not? So this was actually used by the Singapore government, and they used an application like this to create a COVID exposure warning system. So if you had been exposed, you got a message saying, hey, we think you've been near a person with COVID very recently, be careful for the next few days, right? So the Singapore government was the first to release this kind of system. Various other governments that went on to do so. In the case of India, it was a different example because, again, not enough people were active cell phone users to make this make sense. But various developed countries ended up using this kind of technology. I'm going to stop here, but I'll try and give you sort of two important stories about this, right? One, another scary story like the A51, A52 situation. And the second, somewhat of a more hopeful answer for the future. Anyone's heard of a company called Gemalto? Gemelto? Any idea what they do? It's your GK question. No, so Gemalto, I don't expect anyone to have heard about it, but practically all of you probably have Gemalto products in your pockets right now. They are one of the world's largest builders of SIM cards. So if you're using an Airtel or Reliance connection, for example, you have a Gemalto product in your pocket. Okay. So some time ago, Gemalto said that, we are going to put some security in our SIM cards directly, just like AT&T had said. So Gemalto is based out of Amsterdam, and they said we are going to put some security in there, right? They tried doing that. The GCHQ, this is the British government's equivalent of the US NSA. So the GCHQ and the NSA physically infiltrated, broke into their factories, stole their keys. I'm not even kidding, right? The Dutch government was extremely angry about it, but they couldn't do anything. So again, every single time someone tries to impose a certain amount of security onto worldwide communications, powerful countries tend to try and break that, right? And this is everybody. This is not some sort of moral argument against the US, for example. I really like the US. I lived there for a decade. It's a very nice country. But I want you to understand, everybody does this. So if some other country develops some technology which provides that kind of security, Indian government will also infiltrate, Chinese will also infiltrate, Russians will also. Everyone is playing this game because the stakes are so high. Because the downside is you are blind. Everyone else can see every communication, because with large scale computing, we have the ability to do bulk surveillance. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you could spy on 5 people, 10 people, 100 people. We can spy on 1 billion people right now. And that means that governments across the world, this is the usual definition of transparency, right? When I think transparency, I think the government should be transparent to me. The government says, no, 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 you should be transparent. I want to see what you are doing, right? The problem is, of course, there's not just one government, right? It's not just the Indian government. Governments across the world are trying to break into these technology systems, and they are willing to do pretty much anything to do so, right? They're willing to invest billions of dollars to do it. They're willing to physically break into places. They're willing to put their military force behind. And they have done it multiple times, right? The positive side, however, is that I think in the case of India, especially in the last 3-4 years, I think there has been a recognition that this is happening and that it is unfair. There's been a lot of effort in creating better protection for our systems. The armed forces generally, for example, they've started using Psi, which is kernel size sort of version of WhatsApp, you can say. There are various privacy preserving technologies which are being put in place. But I will tell you this, that with the advent of large scale LLMs, these large language models, we are entering a new era for secrecy and privacy. Because this is really in some way the replacement for old school Google searches, right? Nowadays, if you look at younger children, they don't do Google searches anymore. Like, you type something in Google, you have that AI summary. Most people don't bother scrolling down and clicking on a link. You'll read that AI summary and you're done, right? Whatever is the content in ChatGPT is what you're going to believe, right? What is Maradona's father's name? ChatGPT says something, you will believe it. Your knowledge is based on what ChatGPT says. But that is being created by these people sitting somewhere else, right? So if you search, was Jesus a historical figure? Was Ram a historical figure? Was Prophet Muhammad a historical figure? Who is deciding which one will say, oh yes, and which one will say is a mythical figure? Who is deciding? It's someone sitting in California, right? So you're giving a lot of power to these individuals, and very often people are typing all sorts of details. If I have these symptoms, do I have cancer? People are asking. And what does that mean? You have those symptoms, otherwise why are you asking? So you are revealing all this data to a corporation sitting in a different country. And they are all sharing this information. I cannot emphasize this enough. All of this information you're giving, they are immediately sharing. It is not even the US government or the British government or some other government, they have to call this company and say, hey, OpenAI, mujhe data do. No, no, no. वो पहले से दे देते हैं, right? So a lot of these technologies are now being developed in India. You may have heard of Sarvam AI. This is Vivek Raghavan and co, or the same set of folks who developed Aadhaar, for example. Loads of people, we're trying to build our own indigenous ecosystems for this stuff. I hope many of you will be interested in working on these kinds of topics. It is not easy. It is painful. It is difficult because you're competing against people who have not 2 times, 3 times your funding, but 1,000 times your funding, right? But we have had many successes. There's lots of good products that are now coming out. So if any of you are interested, please, I'll be in touch with your principal and your professors. Please coordinate with them. We are happy to set up collaborations. The IT ministry has been very kind in giving us a lot of extra computing power. So if it is compute resources, GPUs you need, please don't mind Bitcoin on them or something. But we do provide them at very effectively free rates. You don't really pay any money to use them. But we have a lot of opportunities, lots of interesting projects. So please coordinate with your professors and please do reach out. Okay. That's it from me for today. And I know a couple of you have had questions. I'll just wait afterwards and we'll talk one on one. Okay. Yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
questions around, please. Yeah.
Yeah, come forward, I can't hear you. You need more breakfast.
Okay, sir. Myself, and good morning to everyone. I want to ask, like, you have already share about the facility. So how can a small startup and a small company if it is like expensive or like
So it is not expensive, that's the fun part. What I said is you have some very big opponents who are opting. But the good part about the laws of mathematics is that they work the same whether you're rich or poor. Right? So there are startups in India. So for example, especially the Mumbai-Pune area has a lot of startups in this area. There's one called 42 Labs which is doing very well. There's Safe Security. There's 15-20 other companies which are creating these kinds of products. And as long as you have some good mathematicians, you can actually build some fairly advanced systems. Because it doesn't matter who's attacking you, right? If the question is that, oh, you have a set of linear equations, you need a certain number of equations before you can solve it. It doesn't matter whether you're the US government or whether you're me, right? You need that many points you need 2 points to draw a line. Doesn't matter who you are, with 1 point you can't draw a line. So that sort of mathematical foundation is the equalizing factor, if that makes sense.
is it like they push an opportunity, like you are talking about data and data privacy and many small, like how we can as a small startup or a small company can get the data legally, or is there any loophole, like we have to?
No, so in India it's fairly standard now. So there are various avenues to get large scale data, which is cleanly regulated by the DPDPA. That came out 2023. There's a DPDPA draft rules that is just coming out later this year, and that provides the detailed regulation of exact. And the secretary level people are especially impressive. I think the IT secretary, Mr. Krishnan, is there, and then the two additional secretary level people, Bhuvnesh Kumar and Abhishek Singh, they are phenomenal people, and they've created a very good, high quality. Now with every law, I think there's always some loophole. Someone will say this is good, that is bad. But overall, I think they've covered the entirety of the important sections to answer exactly what you're asking. How do companies get data legally while making sure that people's data is ethically protected?
We have to give some amount of money to the government, like,
Not to the government. You have to get it with consent from the people without breaking certain fundamental rights. So the thing is that privacy is actually currently classified as a fundamental right. So this is due to the Putteswamy judgment from a few years ago, and the previous Chief Justice Chandrachud has also said the same thing. They've linked it to various other fundamental rights, liberty and dignity and so on. And they have said that effectively privacy is something like a fundamental right. So if you want to read more about it, I think legal language is very hard to understand. So there's a very nice, there's a lawyer called Gautam Bhatia, and he writes something called the Indian Constitutional Law blog. Right? So he has a very nice explainer for the Putteswamy judgment, where Justice Putteswamy puts down, if you're a company and you're looking for data access, or you're the government and you're looking for data access, here are your limitations, and they provide the process in detail. Okay. No problem. Any other questions?
Sir, I have a doubt.
Sure.
Suppose you are working on new technologies, you are working on algos, and as you said, the government is after the data of every person. So will they not know about this research?
They know. In fact, they're funding some of this. But
it's one government who is funding you. But what about other governments? For example, India is funding you, or US is funding you. Then what about other governments? They will be after you.
This is to some extent true. So some of this research, for example, there's an entity called USISTEF.
Okay.
So this is a US-India Common Forum. So not right now. So before, when President Biden was there, So Prime Minister Modi and President Biden signed this agreement that in certain critical and emerging technologies, for example, quantum computing, where I heard there is some work going on here, where you've applied for this grant, and some technologies like this, where we are doing combined research in trying to solve some of these problems. And while doing that, I can tell you, I won't tell you the time period when this was the case, but there are countries through which I am not allowed to travel. So for example, if I have to attend a conference in Tokyo, I am not allowed to travel through China. So at first I thought this was a joke, क्या आता जाता है, you know, I'll pass through Beijing airport, क्या होगा? I had a US colleague, this Italian-American gentleman, Giovanni Di Crescenzo. So he worked for a US defense contractor. He's much older, much more senior to me. So he told me, no, Debayan, this is serious. So he was traveling to something like that. He got down, he had a 8-10 hour layover in a Chinese airport. He got down from his flight, was having dinner, right? They came and confiscated his bag. They just took it. Security people came, they took his bag, took his laptop, goodbye. He got it back 6 months later. So you are right, there are limitations imposed, but because of that we have things like this. While we are working on some of these projects, we actually have to do work on completely separate devices, and we are not allowed to travel through certain countries during those times. And yeah, it's a problem.
Okay.